Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another New Year, New Language Summit session. And in this session, I'm joined by my friend Connor Grooms, who is the co-founder and CEO of Baselang, a Spanish tutoring service offering unlimited one-on-one sessions at a low monthly cost. Connor is originally from the United States, but learned Spanish in a month whilst living in Medellin, Colombia, which ultimately inspired Baselang, as well as the documentary Spanish in a Month. And this year, Connor is going to be talking about his perfect language learning routine and philosophy. So we'll go through all the steps necessary to learn a new language or improve an existing one. And Connor obviously is part of the sponsors of this year's conference with his company Baselang. So we really appreciate Baselang being part of the company. They've provided a fantastic service for Spanish learners over the last few years. And new this year, just for the during the event, they're running a New Year deal where you can get the membership for 149 US dollars a month. This is usually 179, and you can book as many Spanish lessons as you want. And new this year, they've made the lessons available 24/7 with a 5 minute or less than 5 minute notice. You can literally log in right now and book a session for a couple of minutes from now. And there's no limit to that. So new this year, 24/7, and it's a fixed monthly subscription, and there's no limits on that. And if you join the subscription this month with the New Year discount, you will get that rate forever until you cancel your account again. So it's not just a limited time. If you really want to use it for years to come to perfect your Spanish, you can do so. And it's not just lessons either. Baseline really operate from a tried and tested curriculum that they've built over the years. So it's not like you're just connecting with a tutor and you're just kind of shooting the breeze or randomly doing talking, or you're not expected to come up with how to learn Spanish on your own. You can follow the curriculum as little or as much as you want. When I was using Baselang myself, I found sometimes that the curriculum had a lot for a certain grammar point or a certain part of the language. So I asked my tutor to just go to the next lesson. But if there's something you don't understand very well or you want to work on more, they have an extensive curriculum with lots of examples, lots of quizzes, but you can always tailor it to your needs. So if you are interested in Baselang, definitely check out the offer below. And like I said, this is a very limited time offer. So if you're watching this presentation in the future, sorry, it's probably not available anymore. But for anyone being here during the week of the event, January 6 to 10, you should be good. So check it out below and check out this presentation with Connor. And you can also check out his previous presentations with the All Access Gold ticket. So without further ado, let's jump into the session. All right, Connor, welcome to the fourth New Year, New Language Summit.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, you're one of the elite speakers who've been here for all four of them, and we're so grateful to have you back. And we can't wait to see what you got lined up for us this year.
I think we should probably start. You already introduced me. I think we should probably start with sort of what the topic of this year was, which is sort of how to keep on it and build schedules and sort of some of that. And I think when someone is starting to learn a language, I think the very first thing you've got to think about is why, because the motivation is such an important factor here. There's a there's a joke that January 15th is International Quitters Day. Because everyone starts their New Year resolution. It's kind of ironic, New Year, new language, right?
Right.
They start their New Year's resolution, and then, 2 weeks in, basically everyone's already quit, right? And learning a language is sort of like going on a diet or starting going to the gym. Like, this is not something that is overnight, or if it's quick, it's because you've put in a lot of time in a very intense schedule, like I did with Spanish. Right? So it is a commitment to do this, and so there will be times during the process of learning your language that you want to stop, or you want to quit, or you are like, why am I doing this again? Or when it becomes easy to like, oh, I'll do my sessions, I'll do it tomorrow, and then tomorrow I'll do it tomorrow, And then before you know it, you've just kind of stopped without even really deciding to quit. It just sort of like life got in the way, right? This happens so often. Just life gets in the way. It's sort of like a soft quitting. You don't
Yeah.
want to admit to yourself that you've quit. So it's just sort of like, oh, it's still there. You're not, right? So to avoid that, you've got to get really clear on what's your purpose for learning this language. And for some people, it's just because they, particularly probably a lot as a population, a much higher percentage of the people watching this here probably just learn languages because they like it, right? Because it's fun for them.
Yeah.
But for most people, they're learning it for a specific reason. And the more powerful that reason, the more often you can remind yourself of that, the easier it is going to be for you to continue. So, for instance, for me with Spanish was I was shooting the documentary, right? So I wanted to have the experiment of how fast can I learn a language, and then in the middle of shooting that, I fell in love with Colombia, and I knew I was going to stay and live there. I lived there for 4 years, right? So now I need this language as well because of where I'm living. Then for Portuguese, the same thing. I needed to learn Portuguese because I live in Portugal now. And so I wanted to be able to speak the language. I hate living in a place and not being able to speak the language, right? Even when I travel, I was just in Germany for a few days and not being able to speak with anybody. I was just like, "Ugh," like because once you felt that feeling of being able to speak with everyone, you know, it's kind of tough to go back on that. And that's not something that most Americans struggle with because in the States it's all English, but although increasingly more and more Spanish. Um, but it's something that is important for me to speak it. And then with the last language I learned was French. I needed to learn this to be able to speak with my wife's family, and I started learning it before she was my wife because I knew that if I wanted to even be able to meet the family, I needed to speak French because I would have never met them in the first place had I not spoken it, let alone be able to uh, ask for her hand in marriage to her mother in French. So like there's a powerful motivation, right?
Hmm.
So so everyone who's learning, they need to tap into like why is it that you're doing it? And then the other thing is it needs to be fun or at least enjoyable in some way, right? Because if it's just a white knuckle fest, then like it just makes it so much harder, right? And
Yeah.
there's some methods that I don't know could be effective, but like are just not enjoyable, right? It's part of the reason why I suggest people, other than the fact that it's just the most effective way to learn, that they have one-on-one classes. It's because that human interaction, that's like that's what drives it, right? That's what makes it enjoyable. You're not even thinking, oh, I'm gonna go, sit down for a Spanish class or a French class or whatever you're learning. You're thinking, I'm just gonna go talk to my friend Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna learn some stuff and it's gonna be fun. But like I just want to go hang out with Carlos. And
It's like a forced
done right.
planning.
Exactly. You're done right. Your teachers turn into your friends, right? My Spanish teacher, Adrian, he's basically like a brother to me now. And um and so that's something that's powerful is like you don't feel like it's work, right? It doesn't need to be white knuckles. So you have to find a
Right.
way that it can be enjoyable for you as well.
And put it in the calendar. Like be kind of, you know, decisive about when to do it and how to do it, whether it's with the tutor or otherwise.
Exactly. And the other thing is I think there's two kinds of people for any challenge that they take on. So this is for whatever. I think there are not just languages. There are plotters and there are sprinters, right? Plotters is like I'm going to do 30 minutes a day, this very regular schedule every day, and I'm going to be able to do that for a year. And I mean, hats off to those people. I I'm not one of them.
Me neither.
I have a really hard time being that regular. I'm a sprinter. I lean towards intensity. Sparks of intensity and then rest. Sparks of intensity and then rest.
Hmm.
And so for me, when I learn a language, it is in like when I did the Spanish in a month challenge, I did 5 hours a day of Spanish. And that was easier for me to do it that way because I was clear, like, I had to work on the side, but then like, this is my focus, right?
Yeah.
And I do that with any challenge or anything that I'm taking on. I really go head first into it. I can't do just a little bit at a time, right? And this can actually be a challenge with the motivation side. You were saying before we started rolling is, some people will see the results that a sprinter gets and like, oh, they did it in a month. That's not possible. Or they'll think, well, my results aren't that fast. What am I doing wrong?
Mm.
And I think months or weeks or however you want to measure timeline, I think is the wrong measurement for language learning in general. I think it's like hours invested. Because if you do an hour a day over 5 months, it's the same amount of doing 5 hours a day over 1 month. Both of you learn the language in the same amount of time, as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned. One person just condensed it,
Yeah.
right? If you do 30 minutes a day, there is a point where you have to, it's diminishing. And like, if you just do, 30 minutes a week, you're not going to, like, there needs to be some level of concentration for
Sure.
it to stick, right?
And 18 hours a day, probably also not great.
These are the things, like, your brain just can't handle that. And it's also, if
Right.
you're a sprinter, you need to make sure, and I had this with one of my friends who did a challenge as well with us. If you're a sprinter, you need to make sure you're getting a lot of sleep.
Mm.
And
care
I
of
think
yourself.
language learners in general would be smart to try and get more sleep than they normally do, or take even if it's like a 15-minute, like, put your feet up and sort of like rest, even if you're not sleeping. And if you don't have time for that, I understand, life is busy, but like, trying to get a little bit more sleep is really going to help with actually being able to remember everything that's going on. Specifically, if you're doing multiple hours a day, you're pouring water through a sieve if you're not getting enough rest. So identifying, and then for a sprinter to see what plotters are doing, like, they shouldn't, like, identify who you are, and then when you're looking at someone else's progress, identify, okay, everyone's saying to do it like this, but I'm not like that,
Mm.
right? Or if you're a plotter and you see people making super fast results, you'd be like, that's cool, but also I'm not like that. And being able to identify when you're looking at other people, to not compare yourself to someone whose style of learning or going about something as far as intensity is completely different.
So own
Right.
it, whichever category you fall into, own it completely, and then, especially with the sprinters, I guess you just mentioned having that break time also, and giving yourself time to rest after a big sprint, to not risk falling into any kind of burnout territory, or taking like the year off because you had such an intense period of work or
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah, and I will mention, if you learn a language in 1 month, you learn it faster, lose it faster. You do need to do a little bit of maintenance afterwards, but it's like a minuscule amount of maintenance compared to like learning from scratch. But if you study, intensely for 1 month and then you do nothing for 3, you're going to lose, you know,
Right.
more than you would have had you done it that same 150 hours, for instance, over a 5-month period, just because it's been living in your brain for less time.
Right.
Right. Whereas you could probably go, 3 years without speaking a lick of Danish, and you're not going to lose it
Sure.
because you're Danish. It's been in your head your entire life, right?
Exactly.
It's not something you're just going to forget.
No.
So, and then the next thing, as far as like order of operations here for someone who wants to learn a language, I think the next thing is, what you learn is as important as how you learn. So if you're on, and I'm gonna pick a battle with Duolingo here, and I could pick a battle with them for many things, but like, let's say you're being taught, el cangrejo bebe leche, like the crab is drinking milk. Like, when the am I ever going to use that?
Right.
Like, it's pointless, right? And so, and this is the major issue I find, other than the fact that there's no speaking involved in traditional like school settings, right? You learn a lot of stuff that you don't need.
Right.
And so, you can be driving a Ferrari, but if you're driving in a road like this, back and forth to try and get from A to B, you're going to lose to, the 1963 Fiat with, a 700cc, plotter that's just going go straight, right? Obviously, it's better to have a Ferrari and go straight, but it's like what you're learning as far as getting to, for instance, especially if you're getting to a conversational level, which is really a magical place to get to, because now you can actually have conversations in this language, and then you can get to the next level, but like you actually have a functional, useful use for it now.
Mm.
Like getting to that point, you want to be getting to that point as quickly as possible. And I imagine most people listening to this are familiar with the 80-20 concept, or the concept that, for instance, in any language, the first 1,000 most used words make up like 85% of all spoken language, right? And then after that, it's just diminishing returns, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is a lot of people will end up spending time learning, like maybe they'll learn like 600 of those words, but then they'll learn like, 600 words from like the 2,000 to 3,000 range. Like, what are you doing? Like those words that you're learning are not that useful for you.
Oh.
Now there's one thing is like, okay, there's the 1,000 most valuable words for most used words for everybody. Stuff like water and, I went, and, standard stuff that everyone needs to know. But then there's also what is in your personal most frequent 1,000? What do you like talking about?
Yeah. What's your job? Where do you live?
What's your
like
job? Where do you live? How do you want to use this language? Let's imagine, I'm just gonna pull an example out of my hat. Let's say you work in construction and you're learning Spanish because you need to speak with the guys on the site. You're gonna end up learning a lot of technical, or like a lot of words for, or nouns and verbs relevant to that environment, because those are words that you're going to want to use. I might learn things about business or psychology, or how to make things. I just spend a lot of time making things, right? So it's like, or cooking. These are things that are important to me, right? So I will spend time learning words that are in my personal top 1,000, and those will look very different than someone else's, right?
Yeah.
So there's like what are the words that everyone needs to know, and then there's what are the words that you need to know based on the topics that you want to use.
Yeah. And then there's the words that practically nobody needs to know.
Exactly. And it's not that you like, if for people who really want to push it and they want to, achieve mastery in a language, like great, go learn those words,
Sure.
but don't learn them first. Learn the most used words first, because that's going to get you, particularly in the beginning, like as a beginner, like you need to be seeing progress, because
Yeah.
progress is the root of motivation.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you're going to the gym and you're grinding and you see no progress, you're going to become demotivated very quickly.
Yeah.
But if it's hard, but you're seeing consistent progress, that's going to keep you going. So if you go off and you learn things that you don't need to learn, or you learn with an inefficient curriculum or methodology, you're going to spend time spinning your wheels, or just not making progress quickly enough to stay motivated.
Yeah.
Right?
And you think people do this with grammar as well, or other parts of the language?
Absolutely. So for instance, this is another one of the issues with traditional stuff is you will spend an entire semester in the present tense. Bro, I need to be able to talk about what I did, what I'm gonna do. Like these are all things, like for instance, in baselang for our Spanish curriculum, like you see past tense and future tense, in addition obviously to present tense, very, very quickly.
Right.
Very early. Because you need those things. We don't want to gatekeep it, like, let's wait for you to master the present tense. No, because you want to be generating conversation. You can't have conversation without being able to talk about what you did or what you're going to do.
Right.
There are other tenses that like you can push off, or that are a bit more complicated. For instance, with Spanish, there's we call it the voy a hack, which is where you say, I am going to
verb
walk, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to drink. instead of saying I will, right? So I will is the future tense. So for instance, I will sleep, dormiré. I'm going to sleep, voy a dormir, right? So, but the cool thing there is the root word is dormir. You already know that verb. You literally just slap voy a in the beginning, and it just means I'm going to, and then just infinitive of any verb. Boom, congratulations, you have an entire new tense. Why would you push that off and learn that later
Right.
when it's that easy? Like, cool, if you want to learn the future tense later, great. But you can use I'm going to talk about the future. Like, why would you not? So the order in which you learn things and what you're learning makes such a big difference. And that's why a good curriculum makes such a big difference. Is, at Baselang, even if, and this applies for any language you're learning. I'm just using our company as an example because this is how we focus on doing things. Is at Baselang, we've really distilled the curriculum down so that it's the shortest path from A to B. You're not learning anything extraneous, so that you have to learn fewer things in order to get to the destination of being conversational. And that, again, like I said, it maintains the motivation, but also just means you're getting to the result faster, even if you weren't, changing how you were going about learning the language. Right?
Yeah.
Does that align with what your experience is, or what you generally recommend people?
Yeah, totally. One question about that would be, in case you don't have this organized curriculum, you're learning on your own. Maybe you have a teacher or a tutor, but unless they're providing kind of a formal curriculum, are there any ways that you recommend that those people kind of figure out for themselves what is important? Of course, you talked about vocabulary, but what else? What are of the other components in the language? How do I know what's important? Basically, is the question.
So, I mean, for vocab, it's fairly straightforward. There are frequency lists out there, right? So find yourself a frequency list for like the most common 1,000 words or 1,500 words, and just learn those. And we can talk about flashcards in a minute. And then for the grammar, it depends on what language you're learning.
Of course.
Right? Of course. If there are really high quality resources out there that sort of offer in what order you should do it, I don't know. I would suggest generally, even if you're not going to be using a tutor on a longer term basis, at least sit down with one to sort of suss out, or even just a native speaker, suss out, okay, what are the general tenses? What are you using the most? And learn like past, present, future at the most basic. Like learn how those work, right? Learn like the fundamentals, like, okay, like for instance, I don't speak any Turkish, but I know the structure of Turkish is with a lot of prefixes and suffixes, right? So if you're learning Turkish, you need to learn how those work, and all of the details around that, because that's specific to Turkish, right? Swahili does the same thing. I learned some Swahili earlier this year because I was going to climb Kilimanjaro and I want to be able to talk with all the porters. I have since forgotten pretty much all of it because I haven't used it.
Right.
But that language is similar, where there's all the verb conjugations, for instance, happen with prefixes, and you could have like several prefixes slapped onto like a base word, right? So just learning, okay, here's how the grammar works, and then identifying, okay, what are the things that are actually important, right? And what's actually important is I need to be able to talk about the past, the present, and the future, at minimum. Conditional is also nice, like I would like to, or I would.
Right.
Great. And the progressive as well. I am currently, like
Okay.
I'm not just I eat, but I'm eating. And in some languages, I mean, like in French, you don't really need to say je suis en train de manger. Like I am in the process of eating. You don't have to say that. You just say je mange.
Mm-hmm.
And just saying I eat is effectively I'm eating. but you just learn, okay, what is that for each language? Whereas in Spanish, it's very separate. Like I eat and I am eating are two different things.
Right.
So just finding out what that what that is. So you do need to sit down with someone there, but it's like, what are the fundamentals, right? What are the core bits of the grammar, and then just focusing on that. Like, don't get into subjunctive or like the details of this, or like what about you know. And if you really want to pare down, you could focus only on like me and you, and that's very aggressive. I wouldn't necessarily do that with every language. But if you really wanted to like get to having like a basic conversation with one other person as quickly as possible, like forget every other conjugation and just learn me and you, right?
Because
You've
that's
cut
like
it
most
down.
of the conversation.
Exactly. Now, I still think you need to learn all these other things, but you know, it's mostly me and you.
That can come over time, and you get it from context as well. I mean, some of it you don't have to actively, try to learn. It just comes from the examples and the things you're studying.
Yeah, and for native English speakers at least, or native Romance language speakers, the Romance languages are easier in that regard because there's so many cognates, so you can get context much faster because you're like, I didn't know that word, but now that you say it, I recognize it.
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
So like you might not know. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of an easy example, but like
You've
there
forgotten
could be
all
words.
Spanish
For instance,
words in existence.
education in Spanish is educación. Like
Yeah,
if you're just starting to learn Spanish, you may not know that, but then someone in a conversation could say educación, and you're like, oh, I know what that means,
I'm pretty
right?
sure that it's all words ending in tion with like a
Pretty
handful of
much.
exceptions.
Yeah.
So you can pretty much assume that.
Yeah, and there's some cool things in other languages. Like for instance, in French, if you have something ending in tion, you can usually like delete the tion and add er at the end, and it turns into a verb,
Right.
right? So education turns into eduquer, right? Congratulations, you know how to say to educate.
Yeah.
Like determination, détermination, déterminer. Now,
It's
in that case, the verb doesn't mean what you think it means, or it kind of does.
There's some false friends there.
To determine, to like, yeah, but doesn't mean determination. But there's some things like that, and there's some of these cool little hacks you can do with different languages, just like we have the one for I'm going to for Spanish, which also worked for Portuguese, and for French. I imagine it probably would work for all Latin languages. There's going to be things like this in each language, and like learning what those little bits are, right? But you really got to ask, like, if I screw this up, is it going to make a difference in someone understanding me?
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, we don't need it in Danish because we don't have verb conjugation, so
Fantastic,
it's all
right?
good.
Yeah, and it's also like in different languages, what the most difficult thing is going to be different. Like I did 3 years of Chinese in high school. I can count to 99 and say, "Hi, how are you? I'm American. I don't speak Chinese." Like that's it.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah, 3 years to get to that, right? But I could tell you Chinese is an exceptionally grammatically simple language. The grammar is hilariously simple.
Right.
The numbers, like the number system blows my mind. It's so cool. Literally, like say that 17, you literally say 1, 10, 7.
Right.
137, 1, 100, 3, 10, 7.
Yeah, there you go.
It's so easy, right? The grammar in general is that simple. The challenging thing with Chinese is the tones, right?
Pronunciation.
So you got to ask yourself, okay, with Chinese, and this segment is really well into like speaking about accent and the importance of pronunciation and accent. Like in Chinese, I would spend probably the first month, if I were to go learn Chinese right now, I would probably spend at least an entire month just doing ear training and pronunciation training to be able to predictably pronounce things correctly and parse what someone is saying to me and have no idea what they're saying, not actually learn the meaning of anything, but
Right.
just training my ear. to the sounds and being able to identify what they're saying. Because that right there for Chinese is the most difficult part. The rest, yeah, like you have all of the characters and stuff. That's just brute memorization,
Right.
brute force memorization. And yeah, after a while, like characters are built to the same building blocks, and so that will make some of the process easier. But really, the challenge with the Chinese specifically is the accent, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I would start. And in general, actually, and this is something that's not as popular as it should be, I always start any new language with the sounds. And people want to get going and push directly into learning how to say stuff. Like that's exciting. Like, oh, I know how to say this, that, and the other, right? But the best thing to do is to focus on the sounds. Learn some basic stuff, like cool, because you need some words to play with. But really focusing on being able to say things as perfectly as you can is going to make the entire journey so much easier. Because the process of getting yourself to the point where you can understand someone when they're speaking. Sorry, I'm going to repeat that. The process of getting to the point where you can say something perfectly will involve listening and hearing the little differences between what you did say and like how it's actually said, and tuning your mouth to this, which, by the way, pronunciation is literally just muscle movements, right? So if people will think I can't do that or I can't make that sound, it's a process of learning, okay, how do you make that sound? What is like the literal mechanical process? Where does the tongue need to be placed? Where are you pushing air? Where is it coming from? For instance, finding, like, you could move the sound around inside of your mouth and go yeah, and you can move your tongue around and move where the air is coming from and find where is that sound in your mouth. Because, for instance, the O in French is not in the same position as the O in Portuguese.
Right.
Right. And the accent, even in the accent, like Brazilian accent and the peninsular Portuguese accent, are slightly different in the position of the O. You have the O sound in Spanish than you have O. Right. So sort of like O. Like it's a little bit lower for certain parts of Portuguese.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to learn, if you're struggling with the sound and to really tune it, you're basically looking at where in the mouth is this happening. And this can be strange for some people if they've never done this before, but like you're literally just like look on how to make that sound. There's going to be videos for every language on how to make every individual sound. They'll be out there. And then just play around with your mouth to try and like find it. Right?
Right.
And then once you found it, repeat that over and 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 over, because you're going to build muscle memory. The reason speaking your own language is easy is because your mouth is used to doing those things. As you build muscle memory with these new sounds, it will also become automatic. And the process of finding the correct O or the correct whatever in each language, it's now going to make your life so much easier for everything else, because now you're going to be able to understand other people when they speak. You're going to be able to understand what they have said.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference, because there's so many people who, like, they're expecting to hear one thing because they're imagining it in their, gringo pronunciation, for instance, for Spanish. And then they hear something else and they don't understand what's going on, because what they're expecting and what is actually the pronunciation are two different things. And so learning the pronunciation yourself, you tune your ear, and then when someone says it to you, you know what they're saying, because those are the sounds you're actually expecting. And then when you go to memorize all of this vocabulary, you're memorizing this vocabulary with the correct sounds associated with it, right? You're not
Yeah.
learning, for instance, in Spanish, the word for enough is bastante. You're not learning that as bastant, because clearly you're not going to understand someone who's saying bastante if you're expecting bastant, right?
Yeah.
Or even bastante, right? It's just right. And then the other thing is, then there's accent, and that's accent is more about pacing and variations in pronunciation, right? So you can pronounce something correctly and not necessarily have a specific accent. I like to have a marked accent in each language, in general. Like I like to have it be from somewhere.
Right.
Um,
That goes with
and-
your kind of mimicking, which we talked about in previous
yeah,
years.
exactly. And I can get into that again a bit later, but you're mimicking how other people speak, right? You're just copying, and that's the best way actually to learn accent is through just copying other people.
Right.
My accent in French is the same as my wife's accent in French, or as close as I've been able to get to that. And my word choice and all this other is very similar to her because where am I getting most of my exposure?
Of course.
My Spanish is very paisa because that's the name of the people from Medellin, and that's where I learned in Medellin, Colombia. So I have a very, strong accent from there. And it's gotten a little bit more neutral since I've left, but it's nice to have something to be from a certain place. My Portuguese is very Lisboeta, right? It's very much the accent from Lisbon, and that goes into copying the locals and trying to match their intonation, match their pace, and all of this. And a word for anyone who's learning French specifically is the French are a bit infamous for uh, for having high expectations. Like if you learn like basic Spanish and you go to Mexico and you butcher it and you speak Tarzan Spanish, they're going to love you, right? They love that you're trying, right? And they're gonna fight to communicate with you. The same cannot be said for French, especially in Paris. Um, and part of that is just pride in their language, and they don't want to hear you butcher it, basically. At least that's my experience. And again, it's worse in Paris than other places. But what I have found is they're actually very forgiving of grammatical mistakes or mistakes in general, as long as you have a good accent.
Okay, yeah.
So my French accent is quite good. It's not perfect, but it's quite good. And so I get away with saying some stuff that is completely not correct.
Right.
And people don't switch to English with me. And people don't mind having conversations with me because it doesn't hurt their ear to listen to me speak it.
Right.
Whereas if you speak French flawlessly, but you've got a thick accent, they're much more likely to switch to English with you because they just don't want to listen to it. So like getting a good accent is such a great hack also for making people think that your level is better than it is. Like if you speak with someone and they say, someone from another country, right? And they say in a perfect American accent, "Hey, how you doing today?" You're like, "Shit, you speak great English." Like they literally just said the most basic thing. But
Right.
because the accent was good, you're like, "Okay." Right?
Hey, how you doing?
Um,
The old Joey.
um,
But in a
so
practical way, I just want to ask about that. Do
yeah.
you then recommend, you were saying that's something that obviously the responsibility to do that is your own, but would you recommend jumping in and doing that pronunciation practice and speaking practice or sound practice with a tutor from the beginning? Because I often see students are very reluctant to go straight into one-on-one classes because they don't know how to say anything, so it seems kind of terrifying.
Now, I find there's two kinds of students with this. There's people who don't care, and I fall into that category. And then there's students who are really concerned. They want to prepare everything. They want to do the lesson before they go into the lesson.
Right.
And that's my wife. And the thing I would say to the people in the latter group is the purpose of one of the really big purposes of doing a one-on-one class with a tutor is that it creates a safe environment for you to make those mistakes and look like a fool and but not have any judgment or embarrassment or any of those things that go along with it. I
Right.
totally understand people who like don't want to go out in the real world and like start conversations with random people on the street, like or just talk to people. That can be really scary. Like there's a
Even in your
reason.
own language for some people.
Exactly. There's a reason public speaking is the number one fear globally, right?
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But the whole point of doing a one-on-one session is creating that safe environment where you can make those mistakes. Because here's the thing, learning a language is like learning to ride a bike. If you're going to learn to ride a bike, you don't go on YouTube and watch videos about how to learn to ride the bike or mechanical manuals about how the bike works. No, you get on the bike and you fall down and then you get back on the bike and you pedal a little bit and then you learn. And what the tutoring does, what that one-on-one environment does, is it creates a soft floor for you to fall down on when you will fall, because you will fall. In fact, your willingness to fall and make mistakes and just speak anyways is, in my experience from baseline students, the number one factor in how quickly someone learns out of anything. Is how willing are you to just make mistakes and then continue again.
Yeah.
And the tutoring environment makes that less scary because if you fall down, you landed on a padded surface, it doesn't matter. You get back up again and you continue, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of many reasons why group classes, in my opinion, suck. I think group classes are
It's just not a safe environment, really.
group classes suck.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's not a safe environment because you have the potential judgment of the other students is one of those reasons. The other thing is you need to ride the bike yourself. In a group class, the teacher might be paying attention to someone else riding the bike, and you can hide in the back. And if you're afraid to ride the bike, you can let other people ride the bike, and you're still part of the group class.
Hmm.
It's very easy in a group class to hide, to
Exactly.
not speak, to not use a language, to listen to someone else answer the question and think, yeah, I knew that. Because I'll tell you, recall is a lot more difficult than recognition. Well, again, we'll get to flashcards later, but it's why you always put your native language on the front of the card. Because, like I was the example earlier, with education, for instance, if you see on the front of the card the Spanish educación, you know what that means. But if I just give you education, you might not remember, oh, the word is educación. And that's what you're doing when you're learning language. You're going from one language to the other. The whole concept of not ever translating, I think, is a bunch of rubbish.
Hmm.
Of course, there's going to be translation going on. You need a concept to bridge over to the new concept. Some things can't be translated, right? And that's where mimicry helps as well. And if you want to learn vocab words by using photos, like cool. But um, but back to the group classes, you need to be doing the speaking yourself.
Yeah.
Because the only way that you're going to learn. And the other thing is, in a group class, they have to focus on the needs of everybody, right? So just based off of that, you're reduced to the lowest common denominator. Or their questions might be different than your questions. Not personalized to you. It's not at your pace. It's not based on your needs. It's not based on your style of learning. It's one of the more important things that is really important how we handle classes is there something, and this is actually useful for any kind of conversation that you may have with someone, is there's this concept of criteria. This is something helpful for any kind of conversation, is the concept of criteria. What is important to you? And for some people, what's most important to them in a teacher is that the class is fun. Even if the teacher is a little bit worse at the explanation portion, if the teacher is fun, they will rate that teacher highly. And that's more important to them. There are other people who care more about how good are they at explaining things, or how clear is their accent, or there's all these different criteria. So you need to learn what is important. So that one of the teacher's jobs is to learn what is important to this student. What do they want? How much English do they want me to use? I personally like getting grammar explanations in English. It just helps when you're explaining a concept. Just explain it to me in English. We'll switch right back to French, for instance, afterwards. But like, just explain the concept to me in English. Some people, they want everything in the language. And some people need to be pushed to use language more because they're too comfortable switching back to English, right? But knowing that's a piece of criteria. And in a group class, the criteria are going to be different for everybody. And so it's not going to be set for you.
It's a conflict of interest in some ways.
Yeah. So back to the original question before I got off on this massive tangent is, do I recommend someone work with a tutor for pronunciation from the get-go? Yes and no, actually. It is one of those things where you can do a little bit of learning on your own, because there's videos out there on how to make these different sounds. The yes part is you need someone there verifying that you're saying it correctly, because you might think you're saying it right and it might sound the same to you, but you might be doing it very poorly. For other people, they like just working with the tutor directly. I'm one of these people. For some challenging sounds where the teacher's not able to, I think we just can't figure it out between the two, I might go watch a video. But for the vast majority of things, I'm doing it directly with the teacher, because I'm getting that immediate feedback. Mm-hmm. And that's really an important thing, is this feedback loop of like, is it there? Is it there? Like, and getting their feedback to help find it and tune it and then repeat it, and having someone there who can tell you just, is it right or is it not right?
Yeah.
Because if you do it completely on your own, well, you're going to need to record yourself, upload it to, some sort of platform or free site where, like, a peer-to-peer thing. And I know there's one of these out there. I just don't remember what it's called. And then wait for someone to comment on it. Like, the feedback loop is so slow.
Yeah, it's too slow. Yeah.
And then you have to repeat it to make sure you've got it. And then all of the times that you then repeat it afterwards, when you're building that muscle memory, you need someone there to make sure that the 17th time you say it and the 75th time you say it, it's still correct. Otherwise, you could say it right once and then go back to how you were saying it before and build that as muscle memory.
Yeah.
So the no part is you can learn like how to make these sounds, like watching a video, like, okay, playing with your mouth a little bit. But then as soon as you start going into building muscle memory, you definitely have to go with a teacher.
Right. Just tell them I'm working on this. Just tell me anytime you hear something that's off, we can work on that.
Yep. And I'm really hardcore about that when I learn language. I'm really hardcore about that. And it makes a huge difference. And I don't think enough people are serious enough about their accent. Because it's not, for some reason, it's not sexy or it's not encouraging or whatever. People like learning new things. And like, the accent doesn't really feel like a new thing, where they think my accent's good enough, people understand me. Like, the goal should be, I want to sound like, I want people to mistake me for being from that country, or like, do you have parents from there? Like, that for me should be the goal, because that's a major aspect of mastery as well, right?
Yeah, I got that wrong in the beginning. I was on the good enough, train for a while, but then I realized that the pronunciation that you can do corresponds pretty well to your listening comprehension level. So
Absolutely.
the fact that I was good enough in speaking meant that when other people were speaking, I didn't really understand as much as I could have if I have had focused on my own pronunciation first. They might understand me with my broken accent all day,
Mhm.
but it didn't translate into listening comprehension, which was the downfall, and that's why I changed
Yeah,
my mind on that and went to, sound is actually more important.
right. And you also, what is generally the purpose of language? It's to connect with people, right? And humans are naturally xenophobic. We are naturally protect in group, unsure about out group.
Yeah,
And we in modern times, thankfully, most people do what they can to to work against that. Um, but there is a little bit of a natural
sure.
impulse around that. When you speak with an accent that sounds like their accent, you become much more in that my group. They might understand you with a broken accent, but there's a little bit more distance there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if you want to close that distance, speaking with a good accent is important.
Perfect. And we just have a couple of minutes here left for this session. And I
Okay.
know you want to touch on mimicry. I'd probably recommend people check out the session we did last
Mm,
year about that.
yep. For a deeper dive.
And yeah, exactly.
So I'll try and blow through a couple other little core things as quick as I can. The one really foundational concept around learning a language is that there's basically two steps to learning a language. There's learning the stuff of the language, your vocab, your grammar, etc., even in pronunciation. And then there's using those things in real conversations so that it becomes second nature.
Hmm.
And you can't just learn stuff. This is the challenge with traditional classes. You learn, but you never use. And so it's up there, but it won't come out. And you can't just do number two and not learn anything. And this is the challenge with immersion. Immersion, if you are learning stuff, can be the fastest way to learn a language because you're constantly using it. That's the power of immersion. It's the fact that you're constantly speaking and you're constantly using language and you're forced to. That's the power of it. It's not the fact that you happen to be in the country, like congratulations, right? And even people who live in the country, I've seen this a ton in Colombia. People they speak very basic Spanish because they
Oh
have the
yeah.
same basic conversations over and over again. They don't have these deeper conversations. So their Spanish caps out at that level, right? In that way, having a tutoring session, for instance, could force you to go much deeper than pure immersion. So it's like layers of an onion where you learn something and then you practice it in real conversation so it becomes second nature. Then you learn something else and you're expanding layers of an onion and your zone, what you're comfortable with, expands and expands.
Right.
And what you're comfortable with is this is actually also how you understand people when they speak fast, for what it's worth, is if what they're saying is within your zone of like you just understand it at face value, then there is no translation, you just understand. And if you have like one or two words that you have to translate in your head, then that's fine because you can keep up. But
Yeah.
if too much of it is stuff that you don't know, you're not gonna be able to keep up with it. So that's really one of the side effects of like building using it is you're making that something that's second nature. So later in the future, you're not gonna have to translate that when someone else uses it as well.
Makes sense.
So however you go about learning, make sure that you're doing both of these steps because you have to do both. And the speaking element is really, really overlooked. And the importance of actually riding the bike,
Yeah.
you know. And then I guess I could do a quick note on mimicry before we wrap up, because um, people can go to the other one to get a deeper look here. But mimicry is basically listen to someone else and then just copy what they're saying. Like that's as simple as that is try and be a parrot. You might not fully understand what you're saying in the beginning, but if you try and copy other people around you as much as you can, the pacing, the word choice, and in the beginning, literally just repeat, right? Then that makes a huge difference in sounding more native, but also in potentially understanding some more advanced grammar without necessarily having learned that advanced grammar. And that's when you start getting into, I said it that way because it just sounds right, and you don't really know why. You're like, that just sounds right, and you don't. And that's actually a really powerful place to get to, is when you're saying things just because it sounds right, and you don't really remember the rules. Because if you have to go through an algorithm in your head to like, okay, well, it's this thing and then that. No, I mean, you know, if you want to become an official translator and get to a C2 level, yeah, you're gonna need to learn all those rules. But I speak Spanish at an extremely high level, and I never took a single class on the subjunctive. Now, that's not to suggest that people not do that. It's probably good for them to do so. But I just want to highlight the power of mimicry. Of I know when to use it because it just sounds right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's powerful both for grammar and for especially for people who are in an advanced position, but also for accent. And I
Perfect.
hope
Yeah.
we ran out of time. I hope all that was helpful
Yeah.
to everyone listening.
It's a great roundup in the theme of steady going, with your language learning and continuing to learn. Even if you're a beginner, keeping track and getting a good start is just as important as somebody who's been learning for years and wanting to get to that ultra high level. So
Right.
yeah, thank you for that, Connor. And of course, everyone should check out Baseline, who's supporting the New Year New Language Summit.
If you are learning Spanish, obviously, I suggest you follow the advice that I've given in this, because the advice is the advice because I think it works. But we do follow all of that advice at Baseling, and that's how we built Baseling. So if you want an easy tool that allows you to follow all of this advice in a sort of a streamlined fashion, that has a curriculum that's already broken down, that's going to teach you the pronunciation and ensure you get that, that's going to listen to your criteria, then I do suggest go check it out. The first week is just $1, and right now we are hosting our only major sale of the year, and that is for New Year's, and that's running this week from the 6th to the 10th. And our real world program is normally $179 a month. That's for unlimited one-on-one classes over Zoom, 24/7 now. So you can literally take classes, book last minute. Literally right now for me, it's 12:28. I could book a class for 12:30 right now if I wanted to. And so 24-hour classes, unlimited, and usually that is $179 a month, and right now it's $149 a month, and you get grandfathered in at that price for as long as you're with us. So that sale is running right now until the 10th at midnight Eastern US time. So if you are learning Spanish, go check that out. Again, your first week's just $1. If you don't like it, no hard feelings.
Yeah, and check that out in the sidebar, or you can also check it out in the swag bag in the menu above for easy access. But thank you so much for that, Connor. That's an awesome offer. And we'll see you. And if anyone has a comment, of course, comments, questions, Connor, please leave them in the comments below, and we'll get to them in due course. So
anyone who leaves any comments, I'm happy to help. If it's other languages as well, leave comments, or you could even leave my email. I'm happy to answer people's questions and help out whoever I can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being part of the 4th New Year New Language Summit, and we can't wait to see you again in the future summit.